Hello and welcome to the optional practical training workshop put on by the Office of International Students and Scholar Services at Texas Tech University. In this presentation we will talk about the basics of OPT, the different types of OPT, how to apply for OPT, and other relevant topics. At the end, we will cover some frequently asked questions about OPT as well. Let's begin with the basics of OPT. This work permission is temporary and it will last 12 months. And during that 12 months, you are still in F1 status, though. You will be granted one period of OPT for each academic level. It is important to note, though, that the employment must be related to the field of study and commensurate with your level of education. This approval will be granted when you receive an employment authorization document from the government agency that you have applied for this permission from. Let's talk about the different types of OPT. First, post-completion OPT. This authorization will be temporary again, up to 12 months, and it will be granted after the completion of your degree. It does not require a job offer before you apply. You are allowed 90 days of unemployment during the 12 months of your OPT when you apply for post-completion OPT. So you need to communicate with your advisor if you are nearing that limit or are having a problem, in other words, finding a job during that period of 12 months. Another type of OPT is referred to as a STEM extension OPT. This is an extension of the 12 months for an additional 17 months, and this is for students in the STEM major fields such as science, technology, engineering, and math. It requires, when you apply, that you have a job offer, and it is a new application process with a new fee. Company that you will be working for must also be able to what is referred to as e-verify. We won't discuss what that means, but in order to apply for this STEM extension, you need to have a job offer and the company must be able to e-verify. And it does require another application and a new fee. This type of OPT can only be used once during your entire stay as an F1 student. Remember, if you are applying for OPT, the regular 12-month OPT, you are eligible to apply at the conclusion of each degree or program. But STEM can only be used during your one time during your entire F1 program here in the U.S. So this is a combination of the 12 and the 17 months, comes to 29 months. During that entire period, the 29-month period, you can only be unemployed for a total of 120 days. If you are interested and are wondering whether your particular major qualifies for this STEM extension, you can follow the link on this screen to determine whether you are able to apply for the extension. And it will list the different codes that are listed on your document, and you can determine whether you are eligible. Here is what you will need to apply for OPT. Some of the required forms include an academic advisor's recommendation form, an employment authorization end date form, and if you are applying for the STEM extension, you will also need the OPT STEM extension application. We will also have you fill out 2 different government forms to send in with your application. One is the G1145 and then also the I-765. You will also need copies of any previous EADs, a copy of your visa or passport bio page, a copy of your I-94. In addition, you will need 2 color passport photos from the past 30 days and a check or money order in the amount of $380 made out to the Department of Homeland Security. Here is a timeline to help you answer questions about when to apply for OPT and how long it takes. As you can see from this graphic, the earliest day that you can apply will be 90 days from the estimated completion of your program, and you should apply as early as possible. So we recommend from the end of your program, count backwards 90 days and apply then. Now when you apply, you will choose a start date for your OPT. You can choose any day during a 60-day grace period after the completion of your degree requirements as your start date. So you apply 90 days before you finish, and you can choose as your start date any day during that 60-day period. Now you cannot apply after those 60 days, but you can apply up to the end of those 60 days. You would not want to do that though. We highly recommend that you apply 90 days before the completion of your program and choose as your start date any time during those 60 days. Do not procrastinate and do not wait until the last minute after those 60 days or near the end of those 60 days to apply. That will create many difficulties for you and will also decrease the amount of time that you get for your OPT. When you're thinking about this, keep in mind that you must have the card in hand, the employment authorization document that you will get from the government. You will need that in hand, and the start date will have to be valid before you can begin work. In regards to the STEM OPT, you can apply a little bit earlier for that. So when you are in your 12 months, and if you are eligible for the STEM OPT and you are applying for it, you can apply up to 120 days before the end date on your 12-month OPT card. And we recommend again that you apply early. However, for STEM extensions, as long as you apply prior to the end date of the 12-month OPT, you can continue working as long as you have applied and until you get the approval. But that is not the best way to go about this. You can apply early, and we recommend that you do apply early when you are applying for your STEM extension. Choosing a start date can be a little bit complicated. Remember from the graphic that you can choose a start date as any day during the 60 days after the completion of your program. But here are some things to consider when you think about this. Did you apply for OPT early or late? Do you want to go to work right away, or do you want to take some time off? Will it be easy or difficult for you to find a job? These are the things that you need to think through as you choose the start date for your OPT after the completion of your program. It's really your choice, but you don't want to put off applying for OPT too long, because remember, you must have the EAD card in hand before you can start work, and the date on that EAD card needs to be valid. So as you think these things through, consider all of the factors in your particular circumstance and make your choice. But remember, don't apply too late. There are reporting requirements during your OPT period. You need to report those changes, such as employment information, company name, address, start date, etc. And you must reconfirm employment and home address every 6 months. This applies to STEM extensions only, though. Here are some questions that students often have related to OPT that we will attempt to answer. Sometimes students will ask, can you do volunteer work while on OPT? The answer is yes, but all the same rules still apply to you during your OPT if you are volunteering. For example, you need to work as a volunteer for at least 20 hours or more in order to be considered full-time. And remember, you need to be full-time to be considered employed during your OPT. And now remember also, you cannot do volunteer work for a company while you are waiting for your EAD card to arrive. If the position that you are working in at the company is a paid position normally, any quote volunteer work will be considered illegal and will be a problem for you and the company that's employing you. So if it's volunteer work, it has to be true volunteer work, and you cannot volunteer in a position that you would later start to work in and be paid for. That can cause some really significant problems for you and would be considered illegal employment. Can you travel while on OPT? Yes, you can. You can travel in the United States, of course. Just make sure your immigration documents are with you. But if you're traveling overseas, be careful. You do not want to travel outside the U.S. borders without a current ID, a current I-20 rather, signed for travel by your international student counselor, a valid employment authorization card or document, and a valid U.S. visa. It is very strongly advised also that when you return from a travel outside the U.S. that you also submit proof that you are employed. For example, a letter from your employer, or a paycheck stub. Our office does not recommend traveling outside the country while on OPT, though. It can be complicated and it does get risky. So we do not recommend that you travel outside the country while you are on OPT. But generally you will not have problems if you have all of the documents above. You certainly do not want to travel if you do not yet have your employment authorization document or a job. Because when you come back in on an I-20 during your OPT period, the only reason you have for returning to the U.S. will be for employment. So you need proof that you have employment and that you are authorized for that employment, and that takes the form of that employment authorization card or document. Another question, can I study while on OPT? Yes, you can take classes that are incidental to the OPT. They can be recreational or incidental in nature. You can take one or an academic class, for example, also. But if you are going to pursue a new degree, you are required to have a new I-20. And when that I-20 is issued for that new program, your OPT will be canceled. So yes, you can study, but you would not be eligible to begin a new academic program and be a full-time student while you are on OPT. That would not be considered valid. And remember, you also need to be full-time when you are on OPT, so you probably will not have time to begin an academic program. But if you are starting to pursue a new degree, you will need a new I-20 for that degree, and your OPT in that situation would then be canceled. Can I change my mind once I have applied for OPT? OPT applications are not meant to be canceled. So you need to plan very carefully and apply only when you are certain that you can follow through. While we usually advise students to apply for OPT as soon as possible, this is normally what we recommend. In cases where there is some doubt about when exactly you will finish your program, you might want to consider putting off applying for OPT until you have greater certainty that you will finish. If you do not finish and then you want to cancel the OPT after you have applied, that can get very complicated. What to do when my EAD has expired? So you have an employment authorization card and it has an end date on it. The question is, do you have to leave after that expiration? No. You don't need to leave the country because you can stay in the country for up to 60 days after the expiration date on your EAD. But you must leave before those 60 days expire. Now during that 60 days you can also start a new academic program, in which case you would need a new I-20 from that new program, and you can also change to a different immigration status such as H-1B. When you are changing from F1 to H-1, there is such a thing as a cap-gap extension. So what is that? This applies again to changes of status from F1 to OPT, from F1 OPT to H-1B. The cap-gap extension provides an automatic extension of F1 status to H-1B beneficiaries whose F1 status would otherwise terminate, forcing them to leave the country. So while you're waiting for your H-1 and you are F1 on OPT, this is a means for you to continue staying in the U.S. and even being employed during that gap. In other words, if there is a gap between the end of your OPT and the start of your H-1B, you will get an extension of your authorization until the H-1B starts. Now, we really advise you, because these things can change, and we're not giving you H-1B advice for another employer, that you work with your employer and the attorney that is helping you with your case to make sure that this applies in your case, and so that you can gain legal status during this gap between the OPT and your H-1. So here are some very important points to remember as we conclude this presentation. You have 90 days to 120 days during which your OPT and your STEM OPT, during which you can stay in the U.S. if you are unemployed. So the 90 days is for the 12 months, and the total of 120 days would be for those who are on the 12 months and then are eligible for the extension. Please remember that your job must be related to the degree that you completed, related to your major. Please also remember that you need to report any changes such as your home address or any new job that you start, and you need to report that to this office so that we can update your record in the SEVIS system, and so that you remain legally compliant with the regulations related to OPT.